is part of. So I'm here today to tell you that, in my view, data isn't the new oil. Data is the new carbon dioxide. So I'll explain that a little bit. It's a common trope, as you know, in our field, to say that data is the new oil. And the basic idea is to say that it's a new resource that's being extracted. It's valuable. It's a raw product that fuels other industries. But that also implies that data is inherently valuable in and of itself, and that my data is valuable, and it's a resource that I should really tap into. And that leads to people looking at solutions such as individuals owning their data. In my view, that's very wrong-headed. What we need to look at is the context within which the data lives in. So in reality, we're much more impacted by other people's data with whom we are grouped than we are about data about us. And conversely, data about other people impacts us a great deal. Even if you deny consent, so consent, the main framework that data protection legislation has been based on for 40 years, even if you deny consent to, quote unquote, your data being used, an organization can use data about other people to make statistical extrapolations that affect you. I think in that sense, we are bound by other people's consent, not our own. Our own consent, or lack thereof, is becoming increasingly irrelevant, and the policy tools that we have, the data protection policy tools, are antiquated, date back 40 years, and need to be profoundly rethought. So if you start seeing data as carbon dioxide, it becomes clearer that the impacts are societal, not solely individual. My neighbor's car emissions, the emissions from a factory on a different continent, impact me more than my own emissions, or the lack thereof. That's not to say I abdicate individual responsibility at all. What I'm saying is that we have a collective responsibility, a data responsibility. So what can we do about it? I'll be very concrete. I'll give you 3 examples, and I'll come back to these in a few minutes. Example 1. I'm a father. I have a son who's 11 years old. So I take a photo of him playing cricket in his whites on a Saturday morning in East London. And then I wonder whether I should uphold that photo to a sharing platform online, whichever it is. How do I think about it? Is it a personal privacy issue? Am I concerned that something might happen to my son if I upload that photo? Or is it a broader issue? Am I concerned that by uploading the photo, I might be contributing to algorithms that say that white 11-year-old kids play cricket on Saturday mornings, and by extension, people who don't look like them maybe don't play cricket on Saturday mornings? Or is it a good thing? Does it mean that sharing that photo will help build more cricket grounds in East London because there's clearly a need? We know that photos of individuals and groups are increasingly fueled by different types of biases and discrimination. If I'm concerned by that, how do I react? Example 1. Second example, and this is a classic example of the Target department store that many of you will have heard about. A woman is buying products from a department store. The department store uses that information to predict what she might be buying next. But it turns out that what she might buy next is a pregnancy test. So it's a sensitive issue. It's a personal matter. What should the department store do or not with that information? Third example. A group of people is moving across North Africa. A telco, a telecommunications company, has shared their anonymized cell data, and the government has access to granular geospatial data via satellite. The government of the country that they are passing through infers that they're migrants seeking to cross the Mediterranean to the European Union. And by knowing this, thanks to the inference based on that anonymized data, nothing to do with personal data, they preemptively put them in refugee camps and stop their travel indefinitely. Now, the flip side, you could say the same data could also allow NGOs and the UN or the UN to provide help and to support them along their journey. How should we think about these 3 examples? For me, there's a few lessons. The first one is that you cannot separate individual privacy from the future impacts, whether it's positive or negative, to the group and to society writ large. We need to look both at the potential aggregate harm, the risks happening when sharing data, as well as the aggregate good that could also happen. I think of it like a triple bottom line for data. We need to look at the impact the data has on individuals, on groups, and on society. And one of the better ways of understanding this, I think, is to understand the dependencies that this very data-rich world that we are starting to live in, the dependencies that it's based on. There's three dependencies. First one is social ties. For example, people unwittingly revealing something about their friends to a political consulting firm, which was the Cambridge Analytica case in the UK. First one. Second one, the degree to which we're compared to other people who are similar to us. So, as many of you will know, Facebook advertisers can ask to find so-called lookalike audiences or people like X, and to find other users on the social network who resemble those who have exhibited an interest in the advertised product or service. It's not about me, it's about people who look like me, buy like me. And then the third one is when we're compared to people who are different from us, anomaly detection. So there you identify the norm and you look at the deviation from it. So first you need to have access to the individual's data, so for example electricity usage, and then you compare it to the norm. If the usage pattern is abnormally high, maybe that person is illegally operating a business from their premises. Now there's something interesting about that, which is that the other people involved have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea that they're potentially helping the police or other body identifying someone who has an illegal business operation in their basement. Now in all those cases, it's not about my own personal data. It's about the relation between my data and others. And that thick web of interdependencies isn't something that data protection is capturing adequately today. So what do we need to think about? One of the things we need to think about are groups. Now the problem with groups is that we're used to thinking about the groups that are so vulnerable that they warrant specific protection. Protected groups, protected characteristics, race, gender, ethnicity, etc. The question, in part for me, is whether algorithms are creating new groups of people who might experience harm or benefits from these systems, and that cannot be categorized at this point. So for example, people who like to skip breakfast because they wake up too late then won't be shown certain job ads for high-performing people. Is that a problem? Is that a discrimination against people who skip breakfast? How do we think about it in the way that we've been traditionally thinking about discrimination and data protection? So coming to the solutions. At this point in time, there's broadly two types of solutions people have been looking at. The first one is around inferences. A lot of what the algorithms are based on is inferring behavior that people have or might have in the future. So one solution is to protect both the output data, the inference, as well as the input data. What that means effectively is to say, people who skip breakfast because they've woken up late are a group, and I will protect them, and I don't want them to be discriminated against. Now, inherently, that's slightly problematic because there's no upper limit to what might become inferable, right? There's no upper limit. People who like curly fries have a higher IQ than others. This is actually a true example from the Facebook data. You like curly fries, you have a higher IQ. Where do you stop? When do you start saying this inference is okay and this one isn't? It's very difficult. And also, increasingly, companies are not trying to infer and put you into a group. They want to predict whether a person will take an action or not. So this brings us to the second type of solution out there, which is optimization. So in the example I gave of the department store, predicting which clients might be pregnant or not, the department store wasn't creating a group called people about to become pregnant. The department store was just asking, whose shopping habits can we change by showing them what ad? And then maybe the future ad purchases are sensitive, or maybe they're not. So in the US, for example, we've seen how Facebook housing ads were being delivered on the likelihood that people would click on them. So far, so good. But the algorithm was oblivious of any social issues or so-called externalities, so ended up showing babysitting ads only to women, showing builder ads only to men. So how do we prevent that? To prevent it, we need to track the percentage of ads that's shown to different groups. And to know that, we need to know which groups we're tracking. So we need ongoing monitoring in a way that we really don't have right now. So coming back to our examples, the kid playing cricket, the department store ads, the data on the potential migrants, what we would need to know and somehow be more responsible for is how the data is being used. So how can we do that? I think there's a ray of light, and there's a very different way of thinking about the impact that data has on society than the very individualistic way that we've had so far. Specific example, TomTom, the company in Europe, agreed to give information to the local police on where people speed in Holland. TomTom make these devices, you put in your car, you know where you're driving. They didn't give information about individuals in general. They didn't share personal data. The data was in aggregate. TomTom users were furious. The city in the Netherlands didn't just put more police, but they put more speed traps. So people were upset, not because something was disclosed about them, not even because they themselves were necessarily more likely to get a speeding ticket, but because their data would be used to adversely impact other people, part of their broad group, in this case drivers. They're basically reacting to the sense that they contributed to something that will harm other people. Now, if you think about the debate around AI training data being based on photos of you and others and your family and being used in a way that you may disagree with, this reaction that the TomTom users had becomes really interesting. It starts to show a way that we can escape the very narrow way of thinking about what harms might I suffer. You've got to begin to think about the impact that data about you has on others and has on society. And I think if we can harness that feeling, it could be a very, very powerful contribution and a different paradigm, a different way of thinking about privacy, about responsibility, and effectively our data responsibility as well as our data rights. My aim here, to be clear, isn't just behavior change. It's not about saying, don't share that photo of the kid in the park playing cricket. As with carbon dioxide, yes, your individual actions help, but what they really do is they build political space and possibility for a more systemic response. And here, the response I would want is to prevent companies from repurposing data about one group of people to harm another group and incentivizing them to do so when it helps. So to conclude, 1, we need to focus on harms that happen to individuals, groups, and society at large. So we need to focus on the aggregate good and the aggregate harm. It's not solely about privacy. If we have a narrow lens on individual data privacy, we will be legislating for the 1970s in the 2020s. And the 2020s, there was a lot of conversation in the previous panel about the future. If they're anything, they'll be the decade of the Internet of Things. And IoT devices will make everything I'm saying quintuple massively. So what we need to do is to create ongoing monitoring tools that allow us to understand the impact these technologies are having, and the main one is auditability. I think the biggest standard, we talked about standards in the earlier panel, that companies and governments can work on are common auditability standards. It's crazy that we don't have standardized auditability tools for AI today. Finally, if the data impacts protected characteristics, monitor them, protect them. If it impacts characteristics that are not yet protected, consider if they should be, or focus on how the algorithms are optimized. I think, to conclude, I think that's the bigger issue. What are these algorithms optimized for? For example, if optimizing for clicks on YouTube leads to polarization, should we start optimizing for clicks as well as societal harmony? The danger is that it's only what's easy to measure that gets optimized against. So what we need is a new agenda for measurement. And governments need to work with industry to change the incentives they have to measure and measure against something else, as well as measure the externalities that their systems impose on users, non-users, and the broader environment. And that would incentivize them to collect data in a different way. On my YouTube example, one of the problems with analyzing the impact that YouTube has on polarization is that YouTube don't keep the data. YouTube needs to be incentivized even just to collect the data before we talk about auditability. And so finally, I think in that way, the analogy to the environmental movement is quite strong. In the same way that we demanded of other industries to monitor and to capture and to pay attention to their impact on the environment, we should do the same with the data. Thank you.